I walked into my husband's company party and everything that should have been ordinary, light, laughter, music, stopped in a single private image. Behind a wall of glass where people supposed to be building deals and toasting success, I saw him, my husband, and my best friend with him. They were close enough that the world blurred at the edges. For a moment I couldn't hear the band. My hands went numb. I remember the glass fogged where they pressed against it, and the sound of a cork popping somewhere far away, like a cartoon version of joy. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I simply watched, stunned into stillness, while 1,000 tiny, ordinary motions, people clinking glasses, a waiter passing shrimp, kept happening as if the planet hadn't shifted beneath my feet. My heart was loud enough to feel like a drum. Shame arrived like cold water. I was not thinking about revenge. I was thinking, how long? How many times? Was it always like this, in plain sight, and I never noticed? He saw me before I moved. Eduardo looked up, and for a second his face was the face I had loved. Then it changed into a thin, private panic. Camila froze, her expression unreadable. And then I noticed Enrique. He had been standing near the mixer, a quiet presence in an expensive suit. He didn't storm in, he didn't shove anyone. He crossed the room with the calm of someone who knew exactly what would happen if he waited a moment longer. He stopped at the edge of the crowd and met my eyes. He didn't smile. He only said one thing, low and certain. Let it unfold. If you're drawn to stories like this, tap like and subscribe. There are more true accounts coming. Now please, stay with me. That whisper, let it unfold, felt like a verdict. At first I thought it was cruelty. Later I understood it was strategy. Enrique isn't a melodramatic man. He is patient, methodical. In the months that followed I learned how patient can be lethal when wielded inside the rules. It's tempting to imagine he stormed into the office months ago and started a conspiracy. The reality was less cinematic and more surgical. Enrique had noticed oddities, missing invoices, awkward explanations about project deliverables, promises that turned out to be thin on paperwork. He didn't pretend to be a detective. He hired accountants. He sought legal counsel. He began to gather things that would survive a courtroom and a boardroom. Invoices with fingerprints of anonymous approvals. Emails whose timestamps contradicted oral explanations. Signed amendments with inconsistent signatories. He collected what people call paperwork, the way others collect souvenirs. Quietly, patiently, refusing to let emotion drive the process. On the night at the party, while I stood like a statue watching my life collapse behind glass, Enrique had the final piece he needed. He had waited for the moment when exposure would be unavoidable, when reputations, share prices, contracts and partnerships hung in the balance and a single clear presentation would force other people to act. He wanted witnesses, he wanted a stage, he wanted proof that could not be brushed off as spite. The lights dimmed for a scheduled presentation. I remember a ripple of anticipation as the giant screen in the center of the room lit up. There was a slide of quarterly numbers, a CEO's smiling headshot, then a sequence of documents that moved like film. The music receded into an unbearable hush. For a few seconds I thought it was part of the show. Then the screen showed transfers with dates that didn't make sense. Emails that contradicted public statements, clauses removed and replaced without board approval. Names I had trusted were there. So was the proof I had never known existed. No one yelled. People stood. An investor who'd been laughing minutes before closed his laptop and left. A partner at another firm reached for the phone and began dialing, face like stone. A contract manager quietly excused himself and began sending cancellations. The room felt like a body that had suddenly realized it was heartless. It stopped functioning the way it should. Eduardo's face drained to a color I didn't recognize. Camila's hand went to her mouth. They tried to speak. I watched their lips move, but the sound in the room had been sucked out by the gravity of evidence. This was not gossip. This was documents, timestamps, signatures, things that require people in authority to act. And they did act, on the spot. I learned later that the company's counsel had been presented with a folder that afternoon. They read a timeline. They read transfers. They read a record of meetings that never appeared on official minutes. What unfolded in the room that night was less about spectacle and more about consequences. Contracts were suspended, pending deals evaporated, investors asked to be released. Within hours, calls were being placed to external auditors. Within days, a regulatory review had been requested. Rumors, once they found a legal backbone, metastasized quickly in the market. The most brutal moment wasn't the flash of cameras or the whispers. It was the small things. The HR woman who had once praised my taste in jackets avoiding my eyes. The assistant who stopped scheduling lunches with Camilla. The private friends who sent brief formal messages instead of long consolations. In a week, social invitations vanished. Board members resigned. A man who had been introduced as invincible was suddenly untethered. There are people who expect dramatic confrontations, shouting, slapping, public scenes. That wasn't my story. Enrique never wanted a circus. He wanted a lawful unmasking. He wanted the truth presented in a way that made the wronged parties, the shareholders, the employees, myself, able to make decisions. He wanted the consequences to be structural, not merely performative. The strategy was deliberate but lawful. Documentation, legal counsel, staged presentation at the event where the stakes were clear. Afterward, the fallout was measurable. Eduardo resigned from key positions. Contracts he'd relied upon dried up or were renegotiated with independent oversight. Camilla's professional standing evaporated in the same way social capital does, quietly, irreversibly. They both lost what mattered to them most, esteem. They lost trust in rooms where reputation is currency. There were no physical fights, no illegal actions, and no vindictive theatrics, just consequence. As for me, I left, not as an act of triumph, but as an act of preservation. Divorce papers were signed with the same calm formality that had characterized the rest of the undoing. Financial matters were handled by lawyers and mediators. I worried over details, over dignity, over how to explain the loss of a life to people who had been part of it. But I refused to become a caricature of rage. I did not want to feed a spectacle. I wanted to recover my life. Enrique and I did not become lovers, and that is a line I will not blur. We became allies in a different sense. Two people who had been wronged choosing to rebuild with integrity. He offered quiet support. He refused praise. We met for coffee, for strategy, for the mundane logistics that follow a public collapse. He wanted the truth acknowledged. I wanted my future protected. Both are reasonable aims. There was an emotional cost that the cameras won't show. I lost a home that had been full of small rituals. I lost a circle of social life that had been comfortable in its predictability. I had to relearn who I am when my name no longer carried the reflected light of my husband's brand. That relearning was slow and unglamorous. Booking appointments, going to therapy, signing lease agreements, learning to be alone without panic. Yet in that slow work, there was a reclamation of dignity that no public spectacle could have given me. When people ask me if I regret how things unfolded, my answer is complicated. I regret the betrayal. I regret the naivete. I do not regret that the truth came out. There is a difference between seeking revenge and seeking accountability. Enrique's approach, quiet, legal, exhausting, gave me accountability without turning my pain into someone else's entertainment. It also allowed doors to close for the betrayers in ways that were proportionate to the harm done. The lesson I carry is twofold. First, dignity is not the same as silence. Staying quiet in the face of betrayal can preserve a reputation of composure, but silence can also become complicity where structural wrongdoing is present. Second, spectacle is seductive, but it is not justice. Public humiliation can feel satisfying in a fleeting way, but it rarely restores what was taken. A measured response, aligned with legal and ethical boundaries, can dismantle power without turning grief into theater. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment. What would you have done in my place? I read them. Consider supporting deeper stories like this by joining as a member. It helps us continue sharing honest accounts of real lives. I was betrayed by my husband and my best friend. They were undone not by screams but by something colder and, in the end, more decisive. Proof presented in the right place at the right time. The ruin that fell on them was not a triumph I sought. It was the consequence of choices they made. I walked away with my dignity intact, and that, more than public vindication, is the quiet victory I keep.